pick through the details of recent U.S. trade negotiations, and an outline of Donald Trump's U.S. vision for the global economy starts to come into focus, as do its contradictions. By his telling, the president wants a world with suppliers locked in and ring-fenced from China to guarantee access to the technology and raw materials that U.S. companies need. Trump has said he's seeking to use U.S. power to extract maximum leverage for its citizens, enacting a virtual membership fee for access to the U.S. economy and the benevolence of its military might. But his main threat for accomplishing that goal, freezing other nations out through crippling tariffs and export controls, carries real risks that trading partners decide that doing business with the U.S. is ultimately too costly, exposing them even more to Beijing. Further complicating matters, the concessions he's won so far are modest, and negotiations loom with nations for whom the stark framing of a bipolar world is far from clear-cut. At the same time, domestic pressure is building, along with a sense that Trump's appetite for escalation has its limits. The result is a trade policy and approach to China that is blurring. He is seeking both to isolate China and to win greater access to its markets, and asking close trade partners to risk Beijing's ire when the ultimate U.S. policy is itself unclear. "I don't see a well-defined strategy. I don't see a clear goal or set of goals," said Michael Strain, Director of Economic Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute, a conservative think tank. "I see a desire to import fewer products from China." Early test cases have offered little clarity for trading partners seeking to navigate Trump's trade policy. The UK rushed to strike a deal and was rewarded with a framework agreement that reduced tariffs with modest concessions. China played hardball, ratcheting up counter-tariffs despite Trump's warnings, only to ultimately reach a 90-day truce that heavily eases the tariff burden. The lesson European leaders took from the machinations: Trump was more interested in announcing a deal than offering a template for other talks, people familiar with the matter said. Europe also believes the dual deals demonstrated Trump's desire to avoid escalation, the people said. At the same time, the contours of the UK deal did underscore efforts to reshape other nations' relationships with China. The UK agreement eased steel and aluminum tariffs as a condition of freezing out China, angering Beijing. The U.S. is trying to get the U.K. to accept certain rules of origin in exchange for favorable tariff quotas, as well as criteria on ownership focused on eradicating China from its supply chains, which will likely invite Beijing's pressure on London, according to a European assessment of the deal. The U.S. is clearly seeking to permanently tilt global trade relations in its favor with higher tariffs and security requirements to partners purging China from their supply chains, one EU official said. Meanwhile, China has stepped up diplomacy across the world, urging nations to resist bullying from the U.S. and keep supply chains open. President Xi Jinping visited Southeast Asian nations immediately after Trump's imposition of tariffs, and his government invited leaders from Latin America to Beijing last week. Plans are afoot for China to also host leaders from Europe and conduct further outreach to Africa later this year. Let me stress that cooperation between countries should not target or harm any third party, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Lin Jian told reporters in Beijing last week, referring to the UK deal. China was more blunt last month, warning nations that it opposes any party reaching a deal at the expense of China's interests, and would resolutely take reciprocal countermeasures if necessary. China is watching which countries inch closer to the U.S. Cooperation between states should not be conducted against or to the detriment of the interests of third parties, the country's foreign ministry said in a statement to the Financial Times about the UK deal. Additional tariffs. Tariffs still remain high with 10% baselines. Trump has said that is very likely as low as he'll go, and a combined 30% rate on China that is modest only in comparison to the previous level of 145%, European Union Economy Commissioner Valdis Dombrovskis said. So obviously this is a concern because we don't see this kind of tariffs as justified, and we see them also as economically harmful, both for EU economy, even more so for US economy itself, and well, at the end of the day, for the global economy, Dombrovskis said. The EU commissioner added that one lesson of the war in Ukraine was that Europe needs to be fully in charge of its defense and have closed the gap with the US and China on advanced technologies. It's clearly an area where the EU needs more strategic autonomy, he said. Even as European leaders express consternation, markets have surged on the détente. Even with Trump's tariffs poised to rise again, he's still pledging a flurry of additional sectoral tariffs and has said it's a matter of how much, not if. His reciprocal tariffs rise again after a pause runs out in July. Trump's Middle East trip this week further blurred the picture on China, with a flurry of deals on chips and artificial intelligence that China hawks within Trump's own administration worry don't have enough safeguards. Yet while there's been some progress, a deal with India appears close, the chaotic nature of the tariffs muddies the water. On China, Trump has said he both want to wean the U.S. off Chinese imports and knock down barriers for U.S. businesses in the country. On certain products like steel, it's clear they trying to isolate China and limit the import of Chinese materials into the United States via third countries, said Scott Lincecum, Vice President of General Economics at the libertarian-leaning Cato Institute. I don't think they're trying to do that overall for both practical and policy reasons. Trump has also drawn a direct connection to national security, seeing trade talks as a chance to address his long-standing belief that Europe, Japan, South Korea, and others aren't sufficiently compensating the U.S. President Trump and his economic team have repeatedly made it clear that the administration is focused on ending our country's historic and persistent trade deficits by negotiating the removal of unfair tariff and non-monetary trade barriers by other countries that have decimated American industries and undermined American workers, said White House spokesman Kush Desai. The U.S. approach spills well beyond its security arrangements and tariff talks. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick described a similar plan that would see allies agree to invest in U.S. semiconductor manufacturing in exchange for privileged access to those chip supplies. He called for 50% of advanced chips to be made in the U.S. The Commerce Department issued guidance last week stating that the use of Huawei Technologies Ascend artificial intelligence chips anywhere in the world violates the government's export controls, prompting an angry rebuke from China. The U.S. move fully exposes its unilateral protectionist nature, He Yongqian, a spokeswoman for China's Commerce Ministry, said on Thursday. Similarly, the Trump administration wants preferential access to European procurement and for key pillars of the pharmaceutical supply chain to move to the U.S. The scattershot demands mean his list of willing partners could dwindle. Only a handful of other major economies are entwined enough with America that they might entertain realigning more to the U.S. and away from China. Other governments are surely aware of the pressures on the Trump administration to make deals and avert market turmoil, Lincecum said, and so they're inevitably going to be driving a very hard bargain,